Welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Social Sciences, SOSS. Postgraduate Diploma in Disaster Management, PGDDM. MPA 003 Risk Assessment and Vulnerability Analysis. Unit-15 Vulnerability and Development, the Role of Development Planning, 15.0 Learning Outcome. After reading this unit, you should be able to analyze the implications of planning in the context of paradigm shift in disaster management, and highlight issues relating to planning. 15.1 Introduction. Disasters have long-standing impacts. This has significant implication for planning in that providing for short-term relief alone would not be sufficient. Hence, planning and resource allocation for disaster management has to proceed from contingency to preparedness to long-term risk reduction, based on scientific and social risk and vulnerability analysis. Depending on the availability of resources, in other words, affordability on the part of governments, disasters operate as a vicious circle in that shortage of resources and low levels of risk perception lead to inadequate policy for disaster management, which compounds losses when disasters strike. Disasters in turn lead to significant drops in tax collection and investments in the affected area that retards development. Since disasters and development are intrinsically connected, it is imperative that disaster management is integrated with mainstream development planning in order to reduce the overall vulnerability of regions and communities to disasters and sustain growth achieved over years. The integration is significant also because a disaster perspective to development is likely to make development policy more responsive to environmental concerns. Establishment of relation between the two is a prerequisite for achieving sustainable development. Hence, by both the economic and the ecological argument, perspective, providing for disaster mitigation and preparedness in sectoral development schemes is vital to prevent disasters, mitigate their impact and secure development achieved over years besides protecting the environment. 15.2 Planning for Disaster Management. The preamble of the Indian Constitution declares India a socialist state. Although the socialist argument may now be disputable, India still remains, by largely, a mixed state economy. The reference is explained as a state that is regulatory in nature that controls the operation of the market forces, provides for development and attempts welfare of subjects through proactive, affirmative state action in favor of the underprivileged sections of society through redistributive policy. The scope of state action in such a case is an extended one, since it is not limited to the basic minimum requirements of a non-interventionist state, viz., law and order, internal security and international relations, but extends to undertaking development touching almost every aspect of the subject's life, from the cradle to the grave. Following structural adjustment, the Third World has been made to gradually cut down on state functions, to reduce the fiscal deficit as mandated by international institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. In India, though the socialist approach has been compromised in favor of a neoliberal agenda, philosophy that propagates largely capitalist state with some welfareist component, post the New Economic Policy (NEP) of 1991, the political economy orientation of the mixed economy setup has not been completely foregone. Planning is a natural corollary to the political economy approach to governance. Post-liberalization, the scope of planning has been considerably curtailed. Consequently, expenditure on public works programs for generation of income and employment in rural areas has been forsaken. Kumar, Jha, 2004. This could be said on the basis of near-absent public works programs in drought-hit states in 2001-02. Even otherwise, rural development and poverty alleviation are no longer priority programs. This would be further discussed in Unit 16, which deal with calamity relief in sufficient detail. Suffice it to say, calamity relief and expenditure on public works is mired in political controversy, as a result of which people in distress are being further victimized by political disputations. 15.2.1 Implications for plan implementation. Following insistence by international bodies on cutting down on fiscal deficit, the administrative machinery has been considerably pruned to cut down non-planned revenue. Expenditure spent on maintenance activities, financed out of tax collections. This is expected to have two negative fallouts. On the one hand, plan implementation would suffer because of scaling down the bureaucracy. On the other, poverty will be further perpetuated due to loss of jobs. As part of the effort of reducing fiscal deficit, non-viable public sector enterprises are also being shut down. That would further exacerbate poverty by intensifying the unemployment situation. In the specific context of disaster management, disaster recovery would be difficult since governments are spending less and less on public works programs, with planning at the back seat. Post-liberalization, the objectives of rural development and poverty alleviation seem increasingly hard to achieve. However, certain imperatives of planning cannot be ignored. Disaster management is an emerging issue that will increasingly press for resources in coming times. According to B. P. Mathur, 2005, budgetary reforms are needed to curtail expenditure. The following shortcomings are noted. 1. Expenditure sanctions from the Ministry of Finance are not expeditious. Consequently, large amount of funds are submitted at the end of the financial year each year. March rush. Multi-year budgeting with allowance to carry over funds in subsequent years as followed in the United Kingdom, Australia and Scandinavian countries would provide for better plan implementation. 2. Too much excess expenditure is incurred which does the Public Accounts Committee not sanction subsequently as is the requirement because of delay in submission of audit reports etc. India does not have exchequer control whereby legal sanction of the CAG has to be obtained for drawing excess reserves. This leads to scams as happened in Bihar in the infamous animal husbandry scam. 3. Administrative ministries have very little power to reappropriate funds from one head of expenditure to another. Presently there is a limit of 1 crore. Centralized control of the Ministry of Finance should give way to decentralized management control at the level of the administrative ministries. This would also help enforce accountability for results. 4. Financial management in administrative ministries should be professionalized. Instead of generalist IAS officers, professional chartered accountants should be employed for the purpose. The system of financial advisor should be initiated in states as well. 5. Finance and planning commissions take care of non-plan and plan expenditures, respectively, as per division of labor in practice. Police, judiciary, etc. are classified non-plan expenditure and hence not accorded due priority. Finance Commission is also starved of funds. Planning Commission of late has become a stage for politicking for funds on the part of state governments. Technical feasibility studies have lost due priority. Also, capital projects become non-plan as soon as they are completed and suffer poor maintenance. Classification between non-plan and plan expenditure is artificial and should be reviewed for better plan implementation. Hence the central issue in public expenditure is sound financial management. Compromise on planning is uncalled for. Emphasis areas for resource allocation in future development. Planning would be health, education and environment to reduce long-term vulnerability of people. As per Alpana Sagar, 2005, most of the diseases responsible for morbidity are diseases of poverty and lack of access to sanitation and safe drinking water. Communicable diseases are responsible for 50% of the burden of morbidity, injuries for 17% and non-communicable diseases for 33%. Among the communicable diseases causing this high level of morbidity, infectious and parasitic diseases, mainly diarrhea, dysentery, cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis etc., are responsible for 50% of the burden. Respiratory infections, usually pneumonias, 19% and prenatal conditions, mostly low birth rates, preterm births and acute respiratory infections or diarrhea of the newborn, at 17%. 8% of the burden of communicable diseases is due to nutritional deficiencies and 6% due to maternal conditions, often abortion, anemia, sepsis etc. India Health Report, 2003, in Alpana Sagar, Health. According to Sagar, there is need for more public investment in rural areas in trained health personnel and infrastructure. There is also need for more involvement of local institutions and conceptual integration of different programs, which are presently vertically ordered and not integrated with other programs. The government is also presently exploring the possibilities of public-private partnership in rural health infrastructure provision along with devolution of powers and responsibilities to district-level bodies to create the needed integration of different health programs. Education has to be another priority area. According to Amartya Sen, 1990, there is need for capability generation for full utilization, absorption of gains flowing from liberalization and globalization. The reason for success of Southeast Asia economies and now China is the creation of these essential prerequisites to development. At the advent of marketization, China had a largely literate population and a good education infrastructure, which was comparable to South Korea's and Taiwan's. Notably, Britain invested heavily in health programs in the interwar years to achieve present standards of life expectancy. In the absence of such enabling services, people lack the wherewithal to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. Hence, India needs to concentrate on human resource development strategies to take advantage of marketization and reduce widespread poverty or capability deprivation of its masses. 15.3 Significance of planning. Since vulnerability to disasters and development are integral concerns, planning for disaster prevention and mitigation can no longer be overlooked. There has been an increase in the number of natural disasters over the past years. Losses have been compounded because of uncontrolled urbanization and population growth, which have increased significantly the losses from disasters. As per the United Nations, in 2001 alone, natural disasters of medium to high range caused at least 25,000 deaths around the world, more than double the previous years, and economic losses of around $36 billion. These figures would be much higher if the consequences of the many smaller and unrecorded disasters, which caused significant losses at the local community level, were to be taken into account. Devastations in the aftermath of powerful earthquakes that struck Gujarat, El Salvador, and Peru, floods that ravaged many countries in Africa, Asia and elsewhere, droughts that plagued Central Asia including Afghanistan, Africa and Central America, the cyclone in Madagascar and Arisa and floods in Bolivia have been significant global events in the recent times. However, what is disturbing is the knowledge that these trends of destruction and devastation are on the rise. India has been traditionally vulnerable to disasters, with 60% of land mass prone to earthquakes of various intensities, over 40 million hectares prone to floods, about 8% of total area prone to cyclones and 68% to drought. In 1999-2000 decade, about 4,344 million people lost lives and 30 million people were affected every year, besides tremendous unaccounted loss of private, community, and public assets. Ministry of Home Affairs Status Report on Disaster Management. August 2004. Also, with the emergence of terrorism and increased possibility of other man-made disasters like fires, chemical spills etc., potential areas for resource allocation and expenditure have multiplied. There is also a realization of the fact that disasters retard development, setting it back by several decades. Hence, for protection of capital assets and preservation of human resource, disaster mitigation policy is an imperative requirement. Note: detailed discussion on planning has been made in the course MPA 004. Disaster preparedness. Please refer to the aspects of disaster prevention, preparedness, mitigation and planning, as analyzed in MPA 004 and correlate the same with disaster and development for better comprehension of the holistic idea, management of disasters. 15.4 Considerations in development planning. For vulnerability reduction, every developmental planning needs some basic infrastructure. The infrastructure may be physical, social or environmental. These infrastructures are used in some way for the developmental process, but many times, due to faulty management or unorganized implementation mechanism, the developmental processes, instead of being favorable for the people, creates vulnerable conditions. For example, Dam construction for mitigating floods may become the cause of severe flooding in the dam area. Uncontrolled use of chemical fertilizer for increasing production may destroy the crops. Similarly, the construction of roads, railways, etc., for the convenience of people, may lead to landslides or other hazardous conditions for the public. In this way, planning for development itself creates unfavorable and vulnerable conditions. At micro and macro levels, many such examples can be found in developing as well as developed countries. Besides the factors causing natural hazards, some human activities also cause destruction of the slope and ground surface, initiating a chain of uncontrolled erosion in the mountain terrain. Excavations for mining, roads, canals and buildings have added greatly to the mass movements and intensification of erosion in the hilly terrain. Some of the major causes of erosion for which human activities are responsible are as follows. Road construction. Unplanned construction disturbs the stability of the hillside and destroys the protective vegetable cover on vulnerable slopes. Sometimes it also damages the hydrological system. More roads are being constructed without regarding the geological conditions and sensitivity of the ecology. After a detailed survey and measurement by scholars, it has been estimated that the excavation of each km stretch of road requires the removal of 40,000 to 80,000 cubic meter, average 60,000 cubic meter, of debris. Road construction activities are known to increase the many environmental problems in the hilly regions in the following ways. Roads are constructed along the river channels, which cover maximum inhabited areas. Due to this, cultivated land is affected by the road construction. Excavated debris is thrown down on the cultivated field. During the rainy season, the excavated and roadside debris is transported by water to the fertile fields. Every year the coarse debris is ruining the fields. It is very difficult for ordinary people to remove it. It is a very serious threat to the economy of local people. There are many examples of decimation of spring by road construction. Firstly, springs stop flowing due to the continuous blasting, and secondly, spring water percolates under the roadside debris. This environmental problem accelerates the shortage of water for drinking and irrigation in many localities of the basin. Agricultural practices. Terrace cultivation is the dominant practice in the hilly region. The terraces are constructed along the contour lines. The land is classified into different categories on the basis of their quality. The good quality fields are well managed by the hill people. Dat. 1989, but maximum hazards are seen in their fields in the form of slumping irrigated paddy fields and damaged terrace walls in the rainy season. For increasing production, chemical fertilizer are being used carelessly. The nutrients present in the fertilizer wash out with water and deposited into ponds or lakes. These nutrients then, in the water bodies, accelerate the growth of small plants. Ultimately it leads to the threatening of the survival of fauna of that water body. In other words, faulty developmental planning makes the ecosystem vulnerable to the inhabitants of the water body. Embankments. To eradicate floods, one must know what caused them. The Rashtriya Bird Ayog in 1976 made a study and analyzed the causes of the increase in floods in the country through the 1970s. They could find no evidence to show that rainfall had increased during the said period. The cause the commission felt more lay in human factors like deforestation, drainage congestion caused by badly planned construction of bridges, roads, railway tracks and other developmental activities, reduction in infiltration because of increased occupation of land by industries and large-scale urbanization and construction of embankments along rivers and encroachment of floodplains, resultant increased loss of life due to floods, lack of proper organization on the part of government agencies, ignorance of people and sentimental attachment to their lands. People's participation through awareness programs had clearly not been attempted. It was discovered that construction of embankments worsens the problem of floods over the years. Embankments force the river to flow through a narrow channel, which raises the bed of the river. This can be dangerous, as the height of the embankments will have to be raised as well. An artificial barrier prevents the natural overflow of silt and reduces the fertility of the surrounding floodplain. the channel restricts the flood water's rise to such an extent that breaches in the embankments causes the water to gush out with tremendous force that can cause immediate damage. Water logging and the rise of the riverbed are therefore the main disadvantages of embankments. The shifting of the river can attack the embankments and result in wasted expenditure. Dams, like embankments, have proved to be a failure as evidenced by the spate of severe floods in 1954, one of the worst in the country. Environmental, social and mining hazards, industrial development and population explosion in the post-war years have led to the creation of new authorized and unauthorized settlements of immigrant mine workers. Some of the settlements were later proved to be located on abandoned old workings, while in some municipal areas, for example, Raniganj and such settlements house middle-class society. In many areas the new settlements as well as some ethnic villages are situated on unstable zones. The unscientific mining of coal in Raniganj and the adjacent coal fields of Jaria, Giridih, etc. in the past led to subsidence of land and combustion of coal left in pillars at intervals. Consequently, there is abandonment of settlement, both old and new, causing economic hardship. Degradation of land use pattern, whereby agricultural land gave place to long potholes, sinks and marshy grounds. Depletion of groundwater through leakage of aquifers affecting cultivation. Occasional loss of life, directly or immediately related to subsidence. Difficulty in mining operations, as there is always the danger of inundation of a working mine. Mine area subsidence and its prevention has become a worldwide problem and different techniques are being adopted in different countries. The hazards caused by such subsidence are enormous and are being dealt with on high footing in some of the developed countries. In this way, faulty developmental planning in the mining areas makes the environment very much vulnerable to the mine workers. Role of standardization. The most important aspect of standardization deals with the safety of human life in the event of a natural disaster. However low the frequency of natural disaster, like drought, cyclone or earthquake may be, the society has to be prepared for dealing with it and take care of the information system, drinking water, food, shelter and protection against the extremities of weather. All this is possible if man sticks to the basic standards made for this purpose. Standard institutions all over the world are facing several challenges because of the latest researches in the fields of agriculture, industry, transport and information technology. A natural disaster causes sudden destruction to the buildings, environment and causes damage to life and property to such an extent that the normal socio-economic mechanism of society is disturbed, making it difficult to restore normalcy. Disasters not only undermine the development effort and lead to wastage of scarce resources, but also retard development by destroying initiatives. The direct effect of disasters on the economy constitutes damage to infrastructure, crops and productive assets of the local population, besides huge financial burden of relief and rescue operations. Indirectly, disasters lead to decline in population, loss of income, unemployment, and indebtedness of the poor and increased cost of goods and services, etc. It is an acceptable fact that the occurrence of the natural disasters cannot be prevented altogether. However, their adverse societal and economic impact can be reduced substantially by undertaking various mitigation programs. The Bureau of Indian Standards has already prepared certain standard specifications and codes of practice to reduce the impact of natural disasters like IS 1893, IS 4326, IS 13827, IS 13828, IS 13920, amongst many. But the problem arises when these standards are not properly followed and executed. For instance, the earthquake-prone regions should have earthquake-resistant buildings. The building construction in urban and suburban areas is regulated by the Town and Country Planning Acts and building regulations, which do not always incorporate BIS norms. If when they do, lack of expertise among architects and engineers leads to unsafe infrastructure. In rural areas, the bulk of housing is non-engineered structures, which collapse easily. Mud and thatch houses are being replaced by concrete structures in villages. which have increased the vulnerability of the population. The vulnerability of people residing in coastal areas has increased because soil liquefaction increases the risk of damage from earthquakes. There is also the problem of finance. A resource-starved country, like India, cannot afford to spend too much on the earthquake relief in rehabilitation operations, although the government is trying to provide relief in full swing, and money, material and people pouring in from all over the country and world. A bright future for Indians in the 21st century can be built if necessary standards are formulated and rigorously implemented in the right spirit by the state and the non-government organizations. Also, necessary public awareness should be created through the media for observing the safety standards as prescribed by the Bureau of Indian Standards. A core group for earthquake risk mitigation has been set up comprising of experts in earthquake engineering and administrators. States are being pursued and assisted in complying with BIS standards. 15.5 Steps in development planning for disaster prevention. Disaster prevention is intrinsically linked to preventive planning. Some of the important steps in this regard are: A. Research, introduction of a comprehensive process of vulnerability analysis and objective risk assessment. B. Building a robust and sound information database, a comprehensive database of the land use, demography, infrastructure developed at the national, state and local levels, along with current information on climate, weather and man-made structures is crucial in planning, warning and assessment of disasters. In addition, resource inventories of governmental and non-governmental systems including personnel and equipment help in efficient mobilization and optimization of response measures. C. Creating state-of-the-art infrastructure. The entire disaster mitigation game plan must necessarily be anchored to frontline research and development in a holistic mode. State-of-the-art technologies available worldwide need to be made available in India for upgradation of the disaster management system. At the same time, dedicated research activities should be encouraged in all frontier areas related to disasters like biological, space applications, information technology, nuclear radiation etc. for a continuous flow of high-quality basic information for sound disaster management planning. D. Establishing linkages between all knowledge-based institutions, a national disaster knowledge network, tuned to the felt needs of a multitude of users like disaster managers, decision-makers, community etc., must be developed as the network to cover natural, man-made and biological disasters in all their varied dimensions. 15.5.1 Human resource planning. Personnel involved in the exercise have to draw upon knowledge of best practices and resources available to them. Information and training on ways to better respond to and mitigate disasters is important since training is an integral part of capacity building and trained personnel respond much better to different disasters and appreciate the need for preventive measures. The directions in this regard are: A. The multi-sector and multi-hazard prevention-based approach to disaster management requires specific professional inputs. Professional training in disaster management should be built into the existing pedagogic research and education. Universities and professional teaching institutions may develop specialized courses for disaster management and should be treated as a distinct academic and professional discipline, something that the American education system has done successfully. In addition to separate diploma, degree courses in disaster management, the subject needs to be discussed and taught as a specific component in professional and specialized courses like medicine, nursing, engineering, environmental sciences, architecture, and town and country planning. B. The focus towards preventive disaster management and development of a national ethos of prevention calls for an awareness generation at all levels. An appropriate component of disaster awareness at the school level will help increase awareness among children, and, in many cases, parents and other family members through these children. Curriculum development with a focus towards dissemination of disaster related. The different school boards in the country might work out information on a sustained basis, covering junior, middle and high schools. C. Training facilities for government personnel involved in disaster management are conducted at the national level by the National Center for Disaster Management. NCDM, at the Indian Institute of Public Administration, in New Delhi, which functions as the nodal institution in the country for training, research and documentation of disasters. At the state level, disaster management cells operating within the state administrative training institutes, ATIs, provide the necessary training. Presently, 24 ATIs have dedicated faculties. There is a need for strengthening specialized training, including training of personnel in disaster response. Capacity building should not be limited to professionals and personnel involved in disaster management but should also focus on building the knowledge, attitude and skills of a community to cope with the effects of disasters. Identification and training of volunteers from the community towards first response measures as well as mitigation measures is an urgent imperative. A program of periodic drills should be introduced in vulnerable areas to enable prompt and appropriate community response in the event of a disaster, which can help save valuable lives. Capacity building for effective disaster management therefore needs to be grounded in linked to the community and local level responders on the one hand and also to the institutional mechanism of the state and the nation on the other. The National Center on Disaster Management will organize training modules for planners, administrators and command agencies. It will build up information database regarding planning or prevention, preparedness and mitigation. Civil servants will be provided training in disaster management, post-selection, creating awareness through disaster education and training and information dissemination are necessary steps for empowering the community to cope with disasters. Community-based approach followed by most NGOs and community-based organizations, CBOs, should be incorporated in the disaster management system as an effective vehicle of community participation. Within a vulnerable community, there exist groups that are more vulnerable, like women and children, aged and infirm and physically challenged people who need special care and attention especially during disaster situations. Efforts are required for identifying such vulnerable groups and providing special assistance to them in terms of evacuation, relief, aid and medical attention to them in disaster situations. Management of disasters should, therefore, be an interface between community effort to mitigate and prevent disasters and effort from the government machinery to buttress and support popular initiatives. 15.6 Aspects of planning. There have been various initiatives taken in India with regard to disaster planning and relating the same with development for the purpose of vulnerability reduction. Some of the important aspects are as highlighted in the succeeding text. 15.6.1 The High-Powered Committee Recommendations. The High-Powered Committee was set up in August 1999 to prepare a disaster management plan for the country for natural disasters, comprising national, state and district plans. The approach of the HPC is holistic and in line with the Yokohama strategy, evolved during the International Decade of Natural Disaster Reduction, IDNDR, urging planning for prevention, mitigation and preparedness and thereafter response planning, and is expected to go a long way in reducing the loss of life and property due to disasters. Effort of the High-Powered Committee has been to develop an altogether new plan but to build on what already obtains at different levels and streamline bottlenecks as might be there. 30-odd types of disasters have been identified and the same have been grouped into the following categories: water and climate-related disasters, geologically related disasters, chemical, industrial and nuclear-related disasters, and biologically related disasters. For facility of plan preparation, 5 subgroups comprising certain departments have been formed and conveners of departments have been indicated to coordinate the preparation of the plan of each subgroup. A. District Plan. A source book has been evolved in consultation with the State Relief Commissioners, experts and the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy, LBSNAA, Mussoorie, in which a format for a model district disaster management plan has been suggested. It is proposed that the disaster plan could be, for each group of disasters, 1 volume of essential details with historical perspective and current data. Second set of volumes for each type of disaster falling in that group, laying out a prevention plan, a mitigation plan, a preparedness plan and a response plan. Districts would start this exercise with the most immediate and frequent disasters which occur in the district. The district plan would include plans for local bodies like municipalities, town areas committees etc. The mega corporations would be having separate plans on similar lines, for which the state urban development departments would need to take the desired initiative. Disasters like droughts take a long time to develop, and the very first signs need to be attended to. The district collector should be able to intervene at the first sign of distress in case of disaster-related developmental issues, as he can in case of employment guarantee schemes in states such as in Maharashtra. B. State plan. The 5 subgroups similar to the Government of India exercise are to prepare the state plan. Each subgroup would have its own plan comprising one volume of essential details with historical perspective and current data, a second set of volumes for each type of disaster falling in that group laying out a state-wide or region-wise mitigation plan and mitigation strategy, a state-wide region-wide mitigation plan and mitigation strategy. State-wide or region-wise preparedness plan, a state-wise or region-wise response plan. C. National plan. The national plan is primarily to be a response plan of the 6 subgroups with prevention plan of interstate and subcontinental features, prevention strategy of interstate and international issues, mitigation plan of interstate and subcontinental feature, mitigation strategy of interstate and international issues, preparedness plan at the national level, and SARC and international initiative in this regard. The plan is to be regularly updated and periodic revisions would have to be arranged and provided for. People's participation at the interest articulation stage is absolutely vital for the success of a plan strategy. The HPC, constituted in 1999, submitted its recommendations in October 2001. The report identified common response mechanisms based on consultations between government and civil society organizations, international aid agencies and media organizations. An important recommendation has been that 10% of plan funds at national, state and district levels should be set aside for disaster-related expenditures, prevention, mitigation and preparedness activities. The 11th Finance Commission also paid close attention to the issue of disaster management and made important recommendations having a significant bearing on plan expenditure, such as 1. Capital expenditure relating to disaster management activities should be met out of plan funds and incurred on a priority basis over other expenditures, and 2. The government should undertake development work for long-term disaster mitigation wherein concerned ministries, state governments and the planning commission should be involved. Recently, expert bodies have dwelt on the role of the planning commission and the use of plan funds in the context of disaster management. Suggestions have been made in this regard by the 11th Finance Commission and also the High-Powered Committee on Disaster Management. The 11th Finance Commission also recommended setting up a National Center for Calamity Management, NCCM, to manage disasters in the country on a sustained basis. This center, according to the EFC, would be assisted by an independent group of experts who would monitor the disaster scene in the country on a round-the-year basis. This group of experts has been designated Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee by the High-Powered Committee, HPC, which would be an in-house system of the proposed NCCM. The whole issue of disaster management in the recent past has been mired by what can be described as partisan politics, which has come in the way of meaningful long-term planning for prevention of disasters. A useful insight deduced by the HPC through its nationwide consultations is that it appears that the intensity of partisan politics is directly proportional to the lack of planning for prevention of disasters. There is thus an urgent need to lift disaster management above partisan politics and evolve an all-party consensus on policy requirements in the area. In this context, it was a welcome development that an all-party National Committee on Disaster Management under the chairmanship of the Prime Minister was subsequently set up to address all issues relating to disaster management in the country. 15.6.2 Sustainable Development. Planning for disaster mitigation incorporates development administration and sustainable development. As per the Brundtland Report, 1987, Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own ends. It contains within it two key concepts: the concept of needs, in particular, the essential needs of the world's poor, to which overriding priority should be given, and the idea of limitations imposed by the state of technology and social organization on the environment's ability to meet present and future needs. Hence, the objective of sustainable development is not limited to the protection of the environment. Rather encompasses a range of humanitarian concerns involving equity concerns and redistributive policy in furtherance of it in the form of affirmative state action in favor of the deprived and marginalized sections of society, adjusting technology to human limitations, provision of employment and alleviation of poverty, reducing gender disparities, attending to the special needs of children, disabled and the destitute. Hence, environment is understood as a holistic concept encompassing living conditions, which includes ecological concerns and the quality of life of the people. Balanced regional development and empowerment of people at the grassroots level through participatory governance, democracy at the grassroots level have also been identified as essential conditions of sustainable development. Development programs that go into promoting development at the local level have been left to the general exercise of planning. Measures need to be taken to integrate disaster mitigation efforts at the grassroots level with developmental planning and create a more supportive environment for initiatives towards managing disasters at all levels, viz., national, state, district and local. Hence, disaster mitigation planning involves both macro and micro concerns in that collation of policies of individual states is important for proper coverage of disasters, in disaster response and preparedness and resource sharing for mitigation planning, so is decentralization of policy planning and implementation processes, mechanisms with states, for articulating the real concerns of vulnerable people at the grassroots level within individual countries. There are several advantages gained from such an approach. Local coping strategies are emerging as important policy inputs, since they are more in accord with vulnerability in affected regions and the risks posed from hazards. Significance of community-based risk assessment, CBA, has already been discussed in Unit 5. Community therefore has emerged as an important stakeholder in decision-making for disaster management. Accordingly, attempt is being made to understand local coping strategies and incorporate the same in modern engineering practices to ensure optimum resistance of physical infrastructure to disasters in hazard-prone regions. For this, traditional knowledge databases would have to be prepared. Government housing techniques would need to be accordingly modified. For example, raised platforms of houses, community safe haven etc. A program for training of masons is being taken up in cooperation with the Housing and Urban Development Corporation, HUDCO, and the Ministry of Rural Development. While designing plan infrastructure for these areas, specific needs of the region would need to be taken into account. Policy for rural development, particularly infrastructural development, would be necessary in that better connectivity of the rural areas with the mainland would help in speedy evacuations and other disaster response activities. Integrated policy and coordinated implementation would lead to sustainable development in these regions. This would create a dilemma for the government in that with the paradigm shift from socialist to neoliberal ideology, rural development is no longer a priority policy. The future blueprint for disaster management in India rests on the premise that in today's society, while hazards, both natural or otherwise, are inevitable, the disasters that follow need not be so, and the society can be prepared to cope with them effectively whenever they occur through long-term mitigation planning. The need is to chalk out a multi-pronged strategy for total risk management, comprising prevention, preparedness, response and recovery on one hand, and initiate development efforts aimed towards risk reduction and mitigation on the other. Only then can we look forward to sustainable development. Sustainability is the key word in the development process. Therefore, all development schemes in vulnerable areas should include disaster mitigation analysis, whereby the Feasibility of a project is assessed with respect to vulnerability of the area and the mitigation measures required for its sustainability. Environmental protection, afforestation programs, pollution control, construction of earthquake-resistant structures etc. should therefore have high priority within the plans. 15.6.3 International perspective in planning. An international perspective is vital since disasters are a spatial phenomenon, which is not limited to national boundaries. Better international relations to boost trade with countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia, other Southeast Asian nations. China and Japan in particular can greatly augment the economic viability of these regions and reduce vulnerability arising due to population displacement, migrations, consequent to unemployment and poverty of people inhabiting border areas. Natural disasters are not bound by political boundaries and have no social or economic considerations. They are borderless as they affect both developing and developed countries. They are also merciless, and as such the vulnerable tend to suffer more at the impact of natural disasters. For example, the developing countries are much more seriously affected in terms of the loss of lives, hardship borne by population and the percentage of their GNP lost. Since 1991, 2/3 of the victims of natural disasters were from developing countries, while just 2% were from highly developed nations. Those living in developing countries and especially those with limited resources tend to be more adversely affected. With the alarming rise in the natural disasters and vulnerability per se, the world community is strengthening its efforts to cope with it. The Government of India is a member of various international organizations in the field of disaster response and relief. While, as a policy, no requests for assistance or appeals are made to the international community in the event of a disaster, assistance offered is accepted. Presently, linkages exist with the following organizations. A. UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UN-OCHA, which has been made responsible by UN General Assembly mandate for all international disaster response. B. United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, responsible for mitigation and prevention aspects of disaster management. C. UN Disaster Assessment and Coordination, UNDAC, system. 15.6.4 Financial planning. There has been a biased perception of disasters as a contingency measure and not a long-term development issue. Hence, disaster management has been limited to relief and rehabilitation. Disaster provision has been limited to calamity relief, which is classified a non-plan item of expenditure. 5-year plan documents have not included consideration of management and mitigation of natural disasters. There is increasing realization now of the fact that the impact of major disasters cannot be mitigated by the provision of immediate relief alone. Further, although disaster management is not generally associated with plan financing, there are in fact a number of plan schemes in operation, such as for drought-proofing, afforestation, drinking water, etc., which deal with the prevention and mitigation of disasters. External assistance for post-disaster reconstruction and streamlining of management structures also is part of plan expenditure. A specific, centrally sponsored scheme on disaster management also exists. Plan thus already has a defined role in dealing with the subject. You shall read about the issue in detail in Unit 16, which deals specifically with this aspect. 15.7 Policy for Disaster Management. It has been announced in September 2005 that the disaster management and mitigation policy would be in place before the end of 2005. Pranab Mukherjee, Defence Minister, said the UPA government wanted to pass the disaster management bill in the monsoon session itself, but it was decided to await the recommendations of the Standing Committee, which is looking into improvement and modification of the bill. Regarding the proposed policy, the Defence Minister stated that it would have a new orientation towards disasters. Every year, the government is losing 2% of GDP in disaster management in the form of relief and rehabilitation, which in fact is a waste. Therefore, the policy will lay stress as to how the future disasters can be prevented from happening through proper warning systems. He further mentioned that the policy will ensure that structures are developed from top to bottom and greater stress would be laid on the involvement of district administration, Panchayati Raj, municipalities and Nagarpalikas so that these bodies are directly held responsible to manage and mitigate disaster and subsequently turn them for developmental purpose, disaster management, for a safer India. September 13, 2005. States have also been asked to follow up with disaster management policies. Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh have already complied, several other states and union territories are in the process of doing so. States have also been advised to frame disaster management acts to specify authority and responsibility of concerned agencies, delimit their jurisdictions and establish requisite accountability mechanisms. States are also required to develop their relief codes into disaster management manuals, which will specify the process of building plans in disaster-related activities, viz. preparedness, prevention, and mitigation. Committees have been set up for the purpose in some states and National Executive Committee at the Center to give necessary guidelines. Annual Report 2004-05. Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. Relief departments in states had hitherto been restricted in scope, that is, limited to response activities. They are now proposed to be restructured and renamed as disaster management departments to cover mitigation, prevention and preparedness. The changeover has already happened in 11 states, namely, Bihar, Orissa, Andhra Pradesh, Arunachal Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, Nagaland, Sikkim, Lakshadweep and Uttaranchal. Position as in August 2004. The department is to be divided into 4 functional groups. Functional Group 1, Hazard Mitigation. Functional Group 1, Preparedness and Capacity Building. Functional Group 1, Relief and Response. Functional Group 1, Administration and Finance. District Coordination and Relief Committees would also be restructured in accordance with the changes at the national and state levels. This will also be renamed District Disaster Management Committees. District Heads of Development would be its members, in order that disaster management is effectively dovetailed with the district plan. District Disaster Committees have already been set up in 256 districts, the rest are expected to comply. Similarly, subdivisional committees at the block and taluka levels are being constituted. At the village level, disaster management teams and disaster management committees are being constituted. Each village in a multi-hazard prone area will have its village plan, drafted by the disaster management committees, which shall comprise elected representatives at the village level, government functionaries including specialists such as paramedics from primary health care centers, teachers of primary schools in that particular village, etc. The disaster management teams shall comprise members of youth organizations in the village, like Nehru Yuvak Kendra, members of voluntary organizations and other volunteers in the states. They will be trained in search and rescue, first aid and other disaster response activities. The Disaster Management Committee shall review the plan once a year. They would also be responsible for generating awareness among people to foster a culture of prevention through government agencies working with active people's participation. Status Report, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, August 2004. There are also a number of important ongoing schemes that specifically help reduce vulnerability to disasters. Some of these are Integrated Wasteland Development Program, IWDP, Drought Prone Area Program, DPAP, Desert Development Program, DDP, Flood Control Programs, National Afforestation. Now, by a power struggle between the two poles of organized effort in the region, which has thwarted effective regional and local planning, positive appreciation is required of the role of the district officials as well as Panchayati Raj functionaries in order that the two operate in tandem. Networking between people's representatives and official agencies is required for risk assessment and apportioning funds at the implementation stage at the national, state and district levels for prevention and mitigation of disasters as cost effectiveness of prevention and mitigation is expected to reduce relief costs up to 1/10, Pant, 2002. This will call for involving and motivating people's representatives NGOs etc. for undertaking this exercise as part of the routine developmental planning exercise. Friction between local institutions and the district collector can effectively thwart the process. Absence of such networking has serious fallouts. Many development schemes such as road building, implemented differently, are known to cause disasters. In the hills, road construction carried out without imagination has triggered off many landslides, while in the plains, floods have been caused where they were unheard of prior to road construction. The attention of the Planning Commission has been invited to the need for ensuring implementation of development schemes at all levels in a manner so as not to cause disasters. In fact, NGOs have been requested to work with panchayats to evolve model panchayat-level sustainable development and disaster management plans. The basic premise that has emerged from the consultations is that a sustainable development plan be prepared and implemented by the people with government cooperation is the best guarantee to prevent many natural disasters and to minimize the suffering of the poorest in disaster situations. Pant, 2002, 15.8 Conclusion. For development planning for sustainable development, it is necessary to make the planning programs more organized and systematic. To reduce the scope of further vulnerability, developmental processes should be implemented from grassroots level and all precautionary measures should be taken so that vulnerability could be minimized. Developmental planning for welfare statism should not be foregone under external pressure. There is a pressing need for improvement and strengthening of existing institutional arrangements and systems to make the initial response to a disaster more effective and professional. Most of the resources and expertise needed already exist with the government. What needs to be ensured is how they are integrated, trained and deployed. Effective planning integrated with wider development planning would meet the requirements of development and disaster prevention, mitigation and preparedness in tandem. Thank you for watching. We will see you in the next video with the next chapter.